Wind slams the Bar Harbor pier. A soaked girl clutches a cracked snow globe. Why is she hiding here alone at midnight? The wind off Frenchman Bay was the kind that slapped you awake. It came low under the cruiser's door and smelled of salt and diesel and old ropes. I killed the siren as I rolled onto the harbor lot. Midnight on the Bar Harbor waterfront in winter was usually nothing but gulls and clanking halyards. Tonight the gale was throwing spray clear over the breakwater, and the harbor master had sounded tight over the phone. "Thought it was a seal first," he'd said. "But it's not moving like a seal. It's small." My boots hit wet planks and the cold knifed up through the soles. Floodlights washed the docks in hard white. Lines creaked. Lobster boats rocked and groaned in their berths. Down toward the public pier, the wind made a low animal sound as it tore through stacked traps. I pulled my collar up and listened. There, a thin, hiccuping cough, almost swallowed by the storm. "Police!" I called, not loud, not soft. "You're okay. I'm coming down." The pier sloped to the water on slippery boards dark with spray. I put one hand on the railing and squinted under it. The space beneath was a black mouth. Then I saw her. She was wedged between two barnacled pilings, knees to her chest, soaked to the skin. A red knit hat hung lopsided over one ear. She couldn't have been more than 7. Both arms were locked around a glass snow globe, the kind tourists buy on Main Street in August. Its base was cracked, but the words etched on it had somehow stayed clean. Lila. My heart did that old stupid lurch it always did with kids. "Hey," I said, crouching low so I wouldn't look like a wall of uniform and badge. "Name's Caleb. It's wicked cold. Let's get you warm." She stared at me through wet lashes. Her lips were bluish. When I reached slowly toward her, she tightened on the globe, every tendon in her skinny arms turning to cable. The cough racked her again, deep and raw, not the simple chill kind. Bronchial. I'd heard it 100 times in December calls. Okay, I murmured. "You can keep it. We'll take it with us." I eased myself under, ignoring the spray, and slid an arm behind her back. Her shirt was soaked clean through to her skin. She didn't fight, but she didn't help either. She just clung to the glass. When I lifted her, she smelled like cold seawater and smoke, like she'd been near a heater burning wrong. "Was there someone with you?" I asked as I backed out carefully. "A mom? A boat?" Her eyes flicked past me to the dark harbor, then darted away like she was expecting something to surge out of it. No answer. Up on the pier, the wind hit us full. She buried her face in my shoulder, snow globe trapped between us. I moved fast for the cruiser, cursing under my breath at the gust that almost ripped the door out of my hand. I settled her in the back seat, cranked the heat, and handed her the thermal blanket from the kit. She didn't unfold it. She didn't say a word. She just watched me, forehead beaded with seawater, pupils blown wide. "Gonna take you to Harbor Children's," I said, buckling her in. "Good people there, warm rooms, hot chocolate sometimes if you ask nice." Her fingers flexed on the globe. It had a tiny white lighthouse inside, snow resting on the roof. Bar Harbor likes its tourists to believe we're all lighthouses and whales. In a storm, nothing looks like a postcard. I radioed dispatch on the way. "This is Lieutenant Morris. I've got a juvenile female, approximately 7, found under the public pier. Hypothermic risk, possible bronchial involvement. I'm en route to Harbor Children's Clinic. Notify on call." "Copy, Lieutenant," came the reply. "Any guardian present?" "Negative. Child is nonverbal for now." The road up from the waterfront was slick with wind-blown sleet. Christmas lights from weekend houses blinked stupidly cheerful through the mess. She coughed again, a wet, tearing sound that made me tap the accelerator a little harder. "Hey," I said over my shoulder. "Lila, that your name? Like the globe?" Her eyes cut to mine in the mirror. For a second I thought she'd nod. Instead, she hunched, bringing the globe under her chin like a shield. "'Kay," I said. "No rush." Harbor Children's Clinic sat up the hill from the main hospital, a 2-story cedar building to make sick kids forget they were in a hospital at all. At night, the entry awning glowed soft yellow. I carried her in, blanket and globe and all. Nurse Nora Whitfield was already at the desk, gray streak in her brown hair, glasses low on her nose. Nora had worked pediatrics here longer than I'd worn a badge. She saw the girl and was moving before I spoke. "What did the ocean drag in on you, Caleb?" she said, voice gentle, even as she was ripping open a warm air blanket pack. "Under the pier," I said. "No adult. Soaked through." Deep cough. Nora touched the girl's cheek with the back of her hand. "Cold, but conscious. Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" The girl flinched at Nora's voice. Not from me, I noticed. From the room. From the echo. Her gaze shot to the corridor where another kid was crying from a treatment room, to the wall clock ticking, to the squeak of a rolling cart. Her breathing hitched. "Sounds hitting her wrong," Nora murmured to me. "Sensory overload. Could be shock. Could be something else. Let's move her to exam 2. It's quieter." We got her onto a padded table in the small exam room. I started to pry the snow globe from her hand so Nora could get to the pulse ox. The girl made a tiny, desperate sound. "It's okay, Lila," I said automatically. Her eyes widened. So did Nora's. "That what she told you?" Nora asked. "No. It's on the globe." Nora leaned to look. "Lila," she read softly. "Pretty name." The girl made a soft, whistling exhale, like she'd been holding her breath since the pier. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The blanket's hot air puffed around her. Nora checked her temp, listened with her stethoscope. "Bronchitis, for sure," Nora said. "Not pneumonia yet, thank God. We'll do albuterol neb, oral antibiotics once she can swallow without coughing it right back up. I'll have Dr. Singh sign off." "Any kid reported missing tonight?" I asked. "Not to me," Nora said, "but it's a harbor night. Half town's on the water or out of town. You'll have to check dispatch logs." I nodded, but my eyes were on the kid. She was tracing the lighthouse inside the globe with her thumb, over and over, like it was a map only she could read. "Hey, Lila," I said, keeping my voice even. "Is your mom named Irene, or your dad on a boat?" Nothing. Just that thumb moving. Outside the room, the clinic's automatic doors whooshed open. I heard the murmur of cold air and boots, and the clipped voice of night registration. Nora glanced through the glass inset, and her expression changed, like she'd just remembered something from too long ago. She straightened. "Caleb?" she said quietly, eyes on the lobby. "You might want to see who just walked in. I think it's connected." Nora's voice carried a weight I'd learned to trust over 20 years of night calls. I stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, and the girl's quiet breathing was the only sound behind me. In the lobby, a woman stood clutching a tote bag to her chest. Wind had worked her hair loose. Her face was raw from the cold. When she turned, recognition flickered. Hers first, then mine. "Lieutenant Morris," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't think you'd still be here." "I don't clock out easy," I replied. "Nora said you might be connected to the girl." She hesitated before answering. "Name's Nora Whitfield's neighbor, used to be. Irene Dawson lived across from me. She asked me to hold on to something for her, in case she didn't make it back." "Didn't make it back from where?" Her throat worked around a swallow. "The fish plant fire last spring. Everyone assumed she died, but she didn't. I got a call from her 2 days ago. Said her daughter might come looking for me. Said if she did, to give this to the police." The woman reached into her tote and produced a small brass key wrapped in wax paper. She handed it to me like it might burn. "It's to her locker at the old plant, number 27. The brass felt cold even through the paper. "Why not bring it sooner?" "I didn't believe she was alive," she said. "Not until that call. And now, if her daughter's here, maybe she's close." I turned the key in my palm. 27. A locker in a condemned plant that had burned nearly to its foundation. Nora appeared beside me, wiping her hands on her scrub top. "Kid's stabilizing," she said. "Warm blankets helping. I've got her on albuterol and fluids." "She respond to her name?" I asked. Nora shook her head. "Still quiet, but she hums when she's trying to focus. Same little tune, over and over." I glanced back through the glass. Lila sat upright now, tracing condensation on the snow globe. Each time she shook it, flakes swirled around the tiny lighthouse inside. "All right," I said. "We'll keep her here tonight. You stay with her. I'll check that locker before dawn." "Caleb, that plant's sealed," Nora warned. "Pierce's men still guard the yard. You go in there, you'll need more than a key." "I've got a badge," I said. "Sometimes that's enough." She sighed. "Sometimes it isn't." The road to the plant wound past frozen marshes and shuttered bait shops. My cruiser's headlights cut tunnels through the fog. The fish plant sat alone on the waterfront. 3 stories of corrugated tin and blackened rafters. Half the roof had collapsed during the fire, leaving jagged ribs of steel silhouetted against the moon. The gate was chained, but someone had clipped it recently. A fresh tire track cut through the snow. I parked just outside, engine off, and listened. The tide hissed below the pilings. Somewhere deeper inside, metal clanked, a slow, rhythmic sound, like a chain swinging. I stepped through, flashlight low. The main corridor smelled of smoke, salt, and something faintly chemical. My beam caught locker numbers along the right wall, 23, 24. Each door warped from heat. 27 had a melted handle, but the lock still intact. I slid the brass key in. It turned with a reluctant click. Inside, a stack of old pay stubs, a damp envelope, and a small USB drive taped behind a rusted lunch tin. I peeled it off carefully. The tape was brittle, but the drive looked clean. Someone had hidden it before the fire. The envelope bore Irene Dawson's name in smudged pen. Inside was a folded photo, a younger woman and a girl standing by a stack of fish crates, both smiling. The child clutched the same snow globe now sitting beside Lila's hospital bed. A low crunch of gravel behind me froze my hand. "Lieutenant Morris?" a voice said, smooth and faintly amused. "You're working late?" I turned slowly. Alan Pierce, the port director, stood in the entry with 2 men in dark coats. His face caught the light, a calm, polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Night inspection," I said evenly. "Didn't think you handled those personally." "Harbor security's my responsibility," he replied, "especially after hours. You'll forgive us for checking when a police cruiser shows up at a closed site." "Fire site," I corrected. "And this locker belongs to a missing employee." He stepped closer. "That employee's case is closed. We filed the paperwork months ago. Accidental death. You can confirm it in your own system." "Maybe I will," I said. Pierce's gaze drifted to my hand. "Find anything interesting?" "Nothing you need to know about." His smile twitched. "Be careful what you keep, Lieutenant. Things lost in fires tend to stay lost for good reason." The 2 men shifted slightly, blocking the exit. Their coats bulged at the sides, not with tools. I slipped the USB into my inner pocket, tucking the envelope flat against my chest. "Appreciate the concern," I said. "But you're trespassing on a police inquiry now. Unless you want a radio call bringing half the county down here, I suggest you back off." For a long beat, no one moved. Then Pierce nodded once. "Always admired your sense of duty," he said softly. "Try to get some sleep, Lieutenant. Night's not over yet." They turned and walked out, footsteps fading on the ice. When they were gone, I exhaled. My hand was still on the Glock, though I hadn't drawn it. The tide groaned under the pier again, a sound like breath through a broken lung. I locked the locker back up, out of habit, and stepped into the wind. Back at the clinic, dawn bled faint pink over the bay. The smell of coffee and antiseptic hung in the air. Nora was in the nurse's station, reviewing charts. "You're back early," she said. "Didn't get much rest," I answered, setting the envelope and USB on the counter. Irene Dawson left more than just a locker. Someone didn't want it found. Nora's gaze dropped to the photo. Her face softened. I remember them. Irene used to bring Lila to the clinic on Fridays. Same smile, same globe. When the fire happened, the kid was listed as missing too. They never found a body. Well, I said quietly, they have now. She nodded toward the exam room. She finally fell asleep. Been clutching that globe all night. I left the light dim. Through the glass, the first sunlight touched the girl's hair. The flakes inside the globe had settled, the tiny lighthouse gleaming under the miniature dawn. I felt the old pull again, the one between duty and something dangerously close to care. I'd seen plenty of lost kids. They didn't usually look this much like they were waiting for someone to remember them. Whatever's on that drive, I said, it's tied to the fire, maybe more. Pierce showed up before I could leave. He knows I found it. Nora's expression tightened. Then you're not safe sitting on it alone. Neither's she, I said, glancing at Lila. Nora's hand brushed mine briefly. You find out what's on it. I'll make sure no one touches her until you do. Outside, the fog was thinning. Somewhere in it, a buoy bell rang. A hollow sound carried over the bay, as if the sea itself was warning us to listen. The clinic's conference room was barely the size of a janitor's closet. A single monitor hummed on the counter, its light washing the linoleum blue. I shut the blinds, slid the USB into the port, and waited. The cursor spun, then a folder blinked open, labeled simply Manifest. Inside were spreadsheets of shipping logs, hundreds of lines long. Each entry had a destination, a container number, and a column of initials that didn't match any customs format I knew. The dates lined up with the months before the fish plant fire. My pulse quickened as I scrolled further. Some manifests were stamped with the port director's digital signature, Pierce's. And there was another name I recognized, Irene Dawson, listed under Freight Audit. She'd been their quality controller before the fire, overseeing outgoing shipments, which meant if someone had hidden evidence of smuggling in these manifests, she might have been the one who discovered it. Then I found a final tab, password protected. I stared at it, feeling the small hairs rise on my arms. This was what she'd died for. Caleb, Nora said softly from the door. I jumped slightly. She had a mug of coffee in one hand, her other gripping the doorframe. Didn't mean to startle you. Thought you'd want this. Thanks, I said, rubbing a hand over my eyes. You ever see a format like this? Look. I spun the monitor toward her. Nora leaned in, her brows knit. Those initials. That's not shipping code. Could be aliases. Or kids, I murmured. She looked at me sharply. What? I enlarged the list. Beside each alias were numbers. Ages? No, not quite, but there were birth years. 2013, 2004, 2015. All within the last decade. Each shipment was outbound, destined for different private docks along the coast. God, Nora whispered. They weren't moving fish. No, I said. They were moving people. Children. The room went so quiet I could hear the storm drain outside, gurgling with meltwater. You have to bring this to state police now, Nora said, before Pierce realizes you've copied it. I will, I said, closing the folder and ejecting the drive. But if Irene's alive, I need her found first. She's the only one who can testify where these kids went. Nora shook her head. You think she's alive after all that? Someone called her neighbor 2 days ago. From a blocked number. That means she's either running or being held close. She took a shaky breath. Lila mentioned anything? Nothing yet. I slipped the USB into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote evidence across the front. She's protecting something. Maybe she saw her mom taken. By midday, the snow had melted into a miserable drizzle. I'd parked my cruiser behind the wharf office to avoid being spotted from the main road. Through the windshield, I could see Grant Kingsley's yacht docked at Slip 9, white hull gleaming even under gray skies. Kingsley wasn't law enforcement. He was a billionaire with a passion for maritime philanthropy. He'd poured money into the harbor's reconstruction after the fire, bought half the properties at auction, and kept a polite distance from Pierce, at least publicly. I didn't like owing him favors, but I liked child traffickers less. When I stepped aboard, Kingsley was in a navy peacoat, phone tucked under his chin. "Make sure the charter's filed under the Serenity name," he was saying. Then he turned and smiled that practiced CEO smile. "Lieutenant Morris, haven't seen you since the benefit gala. How's retirement treating you?" "Delayed, as usual," I said. "I need help, Grant." He ended the call. "That bad?" "Worse. Irene Dawson. You remember her?" "Worked the docks, died in the fire." "Didn't die," I said, handing him a printout of one manifest sheet. "She found something, maybe human cargo. Someone torched the plant to bury it." His eyes darkened as he read. "You're sure these aren't just fake manifests?" "Pierce's signature's on half of them. And this—" I tapped one column. "These codes align with private mooring contracts your company sponsored for pier expansions. You may be on the same ledger without knowing it." He gave a low whistle. "Christ. Your security team has surveillance coverage out to the ferry lanes, right? I need every camera between here and Scudic Peninsula reviewed. Anything showing a woman matching Irene's build, or a white van in the last 72 hours. Kingsley nodded slowly. "You'll have it." "But Caleb, if this goes public, the harbor's entire economy collapses. You'll have half the town against you." "I already do," I said. Back at the clinic, Lila was awake again, sitting cross-legged on the exam bed. She'd drawn fog shapes on the window, small spirals that looked almost like storm fronts. "Hey, kiddo," I said, pulling up a chair. "You remember me?" She blinked once, then held up the snow globe. "Yeah, that's a pretty one. You like the lighthouse?" She nodded faintly. I tried another angle. "Your mom, she worked by the water too, right? Maybe that's why you like it." Her fingers tightened on the globe. "Mom," she whispered, voice hoarse. It stopped me cold. Her first word since the pier. "Yeah," I said softly. "Your mom. You know where she is?" She looked toward the window. Outside, fog rolled in thick and white, swallowing the harbor view. "Boat?" she said. "What kind of boat?" She turned back and drew her small hand across the window pane, outlining a rough shape, a rectangle with two stacks. A freighter, not a fishing boat. "Pierce runs freighters," Nora said behind me. "Out past the barrier islands. Mostly night departures." Lila's breathing quickened. She pressed her palm flat against the glass like she could see through the fog. "Mom," she said again. "Boat." I crouched level with her. "You saw her go?" A tear slipped down her cheek and she nodded. Nora's hand covered her mouth. "Oh, God." That single nod hit me harder than a punch. Irene wasn't gone. She was taken. "Okay," I said quietly. "We'll find her. I promise." Lila looked at me then, really looked. Eyes gray as the bay. "Light," she whispered. She said, "Follow the light." I glanced at the snow globe in her hands. Inside, the lighthouse gleamed through drifting flakes. "Which light, Lila?" I asked. She pointed at it, then to the harbor window. Same. The old Bar Harbor lighthouse, the one that still worked on the far point, guiding ships home through storms. "Caleb," Nora said softly, "there's a maintenance crew scheduled there tonight. Last minute, Pierce signed the permit himself." The globe slipped slightly in Lila's hands, catching the thin winter sunlight, scattering it across the room like shards of glass. "I guess that's where we'll start," I said. That evening, I loaded my gear into the cruiser, binoculars, a thermal jacket, and the envelope with the USB. The fog had thickened to milk, swallowing the shoreline. As I turned the ignition, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice came through, shaky but alive. "You have my daughter, don't you?" I froze. "Irene?" "Yes. Please, don't let them find her. They'll come for you both tonight." The line crackled, then went dead. I stared at the phone, heart pounding. The last trace of the signal faded into static. Through the mist, the lighthouse beam swept once across the bay, cutting a silver path through the fog. Steady, rhythmic, alive. And I understood then. She wasn't just telling her daughter to follow the light. She was telling me where to go. By dusk, the fog had thickened into a living thing, rolling over the bay in slow white sheets, swallowing sound and light. I'd parked my cruiser half a mile from the Bar Harbor lighthouse and hiked the rest. The cliff trail was narrow, slick with frost, and each time the beacon swept across the rocks, it turned the fog into a wall of white fire. The radio hissed in my coat pocket. "Lieutenant Morris, this is dispatch. You still on site near the point?" "Affirmative," I whispered. "Running a quiet perimeter. Tell state police to stand by. This may connect to the harbor fire investigation." "Copy that." The signal broke in static. I crouched by a boulder overlooking the maintenance road. Below, two vehicles idled with headlights off, a white van and a gray pickup. Figures moved near the lighthouse base, flashlights slicing through the mist. Not a town maintenance crew. I raised binoculars. 3 men. One lifted a heavy case, another adjusted a padlock on the service door. The third, shorter, broader shoulders, was unmistakably Alan Pierce. Even at a distance, his movements carried that bureaucratic arrogance, someone used to owning every inch of ground he stepped on. He turned toward the bay as though sensing eyes on him. The flashlight beam swept up the cliff. I ducked low, heartbeat in my throat. The light paused, then moved away. They disappeared inside the lighthouse. At the clinic, Nora's shift had ended, but she stayed anyway. Lila slept under a thermal blanket, her small chest rising and falling with the even rhythm of the nebulizer hum. The snow globe rested on the nightstand, its flakes stilled. Nora sat by the window, watching sleet tick against the glass. When the front doors slid open unexpectedly, she rose fast. "Visiting hours are over," she called, voice sharper than usual. A man in a navy suit stepped in, flashing a laminated badge. "State Child Services, we received an emergency transfer order for the Dawson child." Her stomach turned. "I didn't file any order." "Administrative directive from Harbor County Juvenile Division," he said smoothly, signed by Lieutenant Caleb Morris himself. "That's impossible," Nora snapped. "He's out on investigation." The man smiled. Then he delegated. Behind him, 2 uniformed men entered, faces half hidden under caps. Something about their posture, too rigid, too rehearsed, made Nora's blood run cold. "I'll need to verify this," she said, stalling. "You can wait here." She reached for the phone on the counter, thumb trembling over the call button. The man's smile froze. "No need for that, ma'am." One of the uniforms stepped forward. His coat brushed aside enough for her to see the grip of a handgun. Nora swallowed. "She's just a kid," she said quietly. "Exactly why we'll take good care of her," he replied. Behind the glass, Lila stirred, sensing the tension in the air. She sat up, eyes wide, clutching her snow globe. Nora's mind raced. Caleb had mentioned a code gray procedure once, an internal lockdown protocol. She had 5 seconds to reach the wall switch. The man noticed the direction of her glance. "Don't," he warned, but she did. Her hand slammed the alarm button. A siren wailed through the halls, red lights strobing. The men cursed, spinning toward the exit. Lila screamed as the first uniform lunged for Nora's arm. Nora kicked the rolling cart into him and shouted, "Run, Lila!" The girl bolted down the hallway, snow globe tight in her hand. The glass doors at the end began to seal automatically as the lockdown engaged. Nora shoved the second man back, felt his grip tear at her sleeve, then ducked behind the nurse's station. A voice barked over the intercom. "Code Gray, confirmed. Bar Harbor PD en route." The men froze, realization dawning. They wouldn't beat local backup. The leader glared at her, lips tightening. "You just made a very bad choice, nurse." Then they were gone, vanishing into the sleet. Nora collapsed against the counter, heart hammering. Lila stood trembling near the hallway's end, eyes huge and glassy with fear. "It's okay, sweetheart," Nora gasped, moving toward her. "You did perfect. You're safe now." The girl shook her head. "No," she whispered. "He said, lighthouse." Nora felt her stomach drop. "Caleb." I reached the base of the lighthouse minutes later, hugging the stone wall as the wind screamed over the ridge. The service door hung open, its padlock sliced clean. Inside, the air reeked of salt, oil, and rust. I heard voices echoing from the spiral stairs above. "Shipment delayed. State Patrol sweep came early. Move her tonight. Her." I gripped my flashlight tighter and started climbing. The beam flickered over flaking paint, up past the second landing where lantern glass caught the reflection of moving shadows. Another voice. "Pierce, the van's loaded. She's sedated." Sedated. My chest went tight. Irene. At the final landing, I paused, hand on the railing. One more step, and they'd see me. The main lantern chamber door was cracked open, light flickering through the slit. I eased it wider. Irene Dawson sat on the floor, wrists bound, a strip of duct tape pressed over her mouth. Her hair was streaked gray from smoke and exhaustion, but her eyes were alive, wide and fierce. A man knelt beside her, syringe in hand. Pierce stood by the control panel, typing commands into a small device. "Coordinates confirmed," he said. "We'll move at dawn before the Coast Guard rotation." "Negative," I said, stepping out, gun raised. "You're moving nowhere." Pierce turned slowly, like he'd been expecting me all along. "Well," he said, voice calm, "guess the girl really did lead you here." "Hands up," I ordered. "Now." The man with the syringe dropped it and backed away. Pierce didn't. He stared at me through the lighthouse haze, lips curling. "You think you can stop this, Lieutenant? Half this harbor's built on the deals I've made. You arrest me, you drown with the rest." "Then I'll drown, doing the right thing," he sighed. "Always the martyr." Before I could respond, he lunged for the panel, smashing a lever down. The beacon light flickered, then went dark. The chamber plunged into darkness. I fired a warning shot. Metal shrieked. Glass shattered. A scuffle broke out. A heavy object slammed into my shoulder. Pain exploded down my arm as I went to one knee. The flashlight spun away, clattering across the floor. Through the chaos, I saw Irene wrench herself sideways, slamming into Pierce's legs. The two crashed against the railing. The ocean roared below. "Get back!" I shouted, surging forward, but the fog inside the room was too thick, turning every movement into a ghost's blur. A single sound cut through it, a small, bell-like chime. The snow globe. Irene's hands had knocked it from her pocket when she fell. It rolled across the floor toward me, light from the emergency beacon catching the flakes inside. I grabbed it, and for one brief heartbeat, saw the lighthouse reflected perfectly in the glass, its tiny light still burning even when the real one had gone out. Then a gunshot cracked the air. I dove for cover. The smell of cordite mingled with salt and oil. When I rose again, Pierce was gone. Only the echo of his footsteps spiraled down the stairwell. Irene lay on the floor, breathing shallow but conscious. I tore the tape from her mouth. "Lila," she rasped. "Is she—" "She's safe," I said. "But not for long, if he gets away." I pressed the snow globe into her hand. "Hold this. It's how she found you." She clutched it weakly, eyes wet. "Tell her, follow the light, no matter what." Below us, the van's engine roared to life. I turned for the stairs, weapon drawn. I intend to. The stairwell was a spiral of echoing steel, slick with condensation. My boots clanged against the steps as I descended, every turn a blind corner waiting for a bullet. The wind punched through the cracks, carrying the diesel growl of the van below. Halfway down, a figure burst out from the landing door, Pierce's second man. I didn't think. My shoulder hit him square, both of us crashing against the rail. The gun went off, a deafening flash. Metal screamed. He lost his balance first. I caught a glimpse of his face. Shock, then gravity pulling him backward through the opening. His scream faded into the ocean below. My pulse was a hammer in my ears. One left. Pierce. At the base, fog swirled in the heavy ribbons through the open door. The van's taillights glowed red in the haze, tires grinding gravel. I sprinted through the mist, gun raised. "Stop the vehicle!" The van fishtailed once, almost hit the breakwater, then corrected. He was heading for the old maintenance pier, a dead end. Unless he meant to drive straight into the sea. I fired at the rear tire. The first shot missed. The second hit true. The van skidded sideways, metal shrieking against the guardrail. Steam hissed from the radiator. Pierce kicked open the driver's door and bolted into the fog, coat flapping. I chased him, lungs burning, the smell of salt and oil thick in the air. His footsteps slapped the wood planks ahead, too fast, too panicked to know where the pier ended. "Pierce!" I shouted. "It's over!" He didn't stop. The fog thinned for half a breath, revealing the edge of the pier, and he ran right past it. The splash was swallowed instantly by the sea. I stood there, panting, listening for any sign of struggle. None came, just the endless hiss of waves and the rhythmic toll of a buoy bell somewhere offshore. By dawn, state police had swarmed the lighthouse. Floodlights cut through the fog as divers combed the freezing water. They found Pierce's coat floating near the rocks, but no body. Irene sat wrapped in a thermal blanket inside an ambulance, oxygen mask pressed to her face. The medics had already given her fluids and started antibiotics. She was weak, but alert enough to grab my sleeve when I came close. "Did he—" she began. "He's gone," I said. "But we'll keep looking." Her eyes searched mine, raw with exhaustion. "He had names, Caleb. So many names. The USB, did you keep it safe?" "Safe enough," I said, showing her the sealed evidence bag. "State's tech team's on it now." She nodded faintly, then looked toward the horizon. The lighthouse beacon had been restored, its slow pulse cutting through the mist like a heartbeat. "She used to love that light," Irene murmured. "Said it made her feel like the world was breathing." "She followed it back to you," I said. Her gaze flicked to me, tears glinting. "Is she here?" "She's waiting at the clinic. Soon as you're cleared, I'll take you to her." The medic leaned in. "She needs a few hours under observation." "Low oxygen saturation." "I'll wait," I said. At the clinic, Nora was still shaken from the night's attack but steady as ever. The local PD had already taken her statement, logged the fake juvenile order, and tightened security. When I walked in, she met my eyes with quiet relief. "You're alive." "Mostly," I said. "How's she?" "In her room," Nora said. "Hasn't slept much. Keeps watching the light through the window." I pushed the door open gently. Lila sat on the bed with her knees pulled to her chest, the snow globe balanced between her palms. Morning light filtered through thin clouds scattering across her face. "Hey, kiddo," I said softly. "I found her." Her head jerked up. "Mom?" "She's safe," I said. "Needs a little time to rest, but she's coming here." The snow globe trembled in her hands. "You promise?" "I do." She slid off the bed and came closer. For the first time she touched my hand. Not timid, but steady. Her fingers were small, cold from the glass. "You found the light," she whispered. "Yeah," I said, "but you showed me where to look." Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the bay in fragments, boats rocking on calm water, gulls circling lazy in the pale sun. A few hours later, the ambulance pulled up. Irene stepped out with Nora's help, her gait slow but determined. When Lila saw her through the glass doors, she ran, barefoot, blanket trailing. "Mom!" The sound cracked the hallway open. Irene dropped the oxygen tube and met her halfway, sinking to her knees. The snow globe rolled across the floor, forgotten for a heartbeat. "I told you!" Irene gasped, clutching her daughter close. "Follow the light, and we'd find each other." Lila buried her face in her mother's coat, sobbing into the smell of salt and smoke. I stood back, throat tight. Nora brushed at her eyes behind me. "I guess that's what hope looks like," she murmured. "Messy," I said, "and real." The reunion didn't last long. The medics wanted Irene back on oxygen, and paperwork waited, but the moment had weight. It grounded the chaos in something human again. Later that afternoon, Kingsley's SUV pulled into the lot. He climbed out, looking older, the yacht polish stripped away. "Caleb," he said, "I saw the reports. You did what the rest of us were too afraid to do." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We haven't found half the kids on those manifests." "We will," he said. "The governor's ordered a full audit of harbor operations. Federal agencies are moving in." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm funding a recovery center here, for any child found in this case. Thought maybe you'd want to help oversee it." I stared at him for a moment. "You trying to buy forgiveness?" "Trying to make amends," he said simply. I looked back toward the window where Lila sat beside her mother, the snow globe between them. The flakes drifted slow, catching the light. "Then start with them," I said. "They deserve a home that isn't borrowed from a storm." Kingsley nodded. "We'll name it the Harborlight Center. Feels right." That evening, the three of us stood by the pier, the same one where I'd first found Lila under the boards. The wind had calmed, the sky pale lavender over the bay. Irene leaned against the railing, her daughter's hand in hers. "They said you found us because of this," she said, holding up the globe. "Funny. I bought it years ago for her birthday. Told her even in storms, there's always a light somewhere." "Good advice," I said. Lila shook the globe gently. The tiny lighthouse shimmered with flakes, its lamp glowing gold. "Can we go see the real one now?" she asked. "Soon," Irene said. "But for now, this one's enough." The beam from the actual lighthouse swept across the harbor just then, touching the water like a benediction. Irene smiled faintly. "She won't remember the cold or the fear, will she?" "She'll remember who came back for her," I said. "That's what sticks." We stood in silence, the tide whispering below. The snow globe caught the last light of day, scattering it into 1,000 small stars. The weeks after the lighthouse incident felt unreal, like the whole town was holding its breath. The federal investigation moved fast once the manifests leaked to the press. Agents raided warehouses from Bar Harbor down to Portland, arresting half a dozen of Pierce's associates. They called it the Harborlight Case. Every headline used the same word: trafficking. For me, the sound of it was still a wound. Lila stayed at the clinic under temporary protection while Irene testified in closed sessions. Nora became the unofficial guardian, sleeping on a cot in the hallway when the nightmares hit. Some nights I stopped by after shifts, sitting in the dark corridor with coffee gone cold, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor that wasn't even attached anymore. It just comforted her to hear it. "Does it ever stop feeling like you failed?" I asked Nora once. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. "When a child laughs again, you forgive yourself for a minute, then it starts over." I understood. By mid-March, the harbor thawed. The town tried to move on, repainting its welcome signs and reopening the wharf cafes. But under the surface, people whispered about how close they'd lived to something monstrous, about the kids still unaccounted for. One afternoon, I drove Irene and Lila down to the courthouse for the first formal hearing. The wind was sharp but clean, and seagulls screamed over the parking lot like nothing had ever happened. Irene sat in the back seat, hands clasped tight. "You sure this helps?" she asked. "It's the next step," I said. "You tell the truth. The rest follows." Lila leaned forward from her booster seat. "Will the bad man be there?" "No," Irene said quickly, though her voice shook. "He's gone, baby. He can't hurt anyone now." But she glanced at me in the mirror, both of us remembering there'd been no body, only a coat tangled in seaweed. Inside the courthouse, the walls smelled faintly of disinfectant and pine cleaner. Assistant District Attorney Megan Cross met us at security. She was young, but had the steel of someone who'd watched too many families unravel in her office. "Mrs. Dawson," she said, shaking Irene's hand, "your statement will go a long way toward indictments higher up the chain. You ready?" "As I'll ever be." Cross crouched in front of Lila, softening. "You did something very brave, sweetheart. You helped stop some bad people." Lila looked down at her sneakers. "I just followed the light." Cross smiled gently. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do." The hearing was short. Irene described how Pierce's crew had forced her to falsify export documents, how she'd discovered the children hidden among freight containers marked for offshore resorts. When she tried to report it, they locked her inside the burning plant, assuming she'd never crawl out. I sat in the back row as she spoke, her voice trembling but steady. The snow globe sat on the witness table, small and absurd among stacks of legal paper. When she mentioned it, the birthday gift, the way it had survived the fire, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Harlan took off his glasses. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "you've endured something this town will not forget." "Thank you." Afterward, in the hallway, reporters swarmed until the marshals cut them off. Irene looked ready to collapse. I guided her toward the exit where sunlight spilled through the glass doors. Outside, Lila waited on the steps, snow globe glowing in her hands. She ran to her mother, almost tripping over her coat. "It's over," she said. "We can go home now." Irene nodded, tears sliding freely. "Yes, baby, we can." But I knew better. Nothing was really over until the missing names on that list had answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sea was loud against the rocks behind my house. Around 2 a.m., a sharp tapping pulled me out of bed. For a second, I thought it was wind rattling the window. Then I saw it. A small white envelope taped to my door, soaked through. No return address. Inside was a single line written in ink that had run from rain. "The light never dies, Lieutenant." And below it, a printed photograph. Grainy, zoomed from a distance. A man boarding a freighter at dusk, coat collar up, face half turned. The same calm profile I'd memorized in the lighthouse haze. Alan Pierce. I stared at it, heart thudding slow and deliberate. He was alive. The next morning, I brought the photo to Kingsley. He studied it in silence at his desk aboard the Serenity. Outside, gulls wheeled over the harbor and a spring fog crawled in from the sea again, soft and deceptive. "This was taken from the ferry terminal 2 nights ago," I said. "Boat's name looks like Arcadia Dawn, registered to a shell company out of Nova Scotia." Kingsley frowned. "He's heading for open water. We can alert the Coast Guard." "Already did," I said, "but he knows the channels better than anyone. If he's alive, he's not done." Kingsley set the photo down carefully. "You'll go after him, won't you?" "I don't have a badge anymore," I reminded him. "Technically retired now." He smiled thinly. "Since when has that stopped you?" Back at the clinic, Nora was reading aloud from a picture book while Lila colored beside her. When I came in, the girl looked up, grinned shy but genuine. "Hi, Caleb." "Hey, sailor." I crouched beside her table. "How's the globe holding up?" She held it up proudly. "Still shining." Irene appeared from the hallway wearing her first real smile in weeks. "They're releasing us tomorrow. Lila wants to see the sea again." "Good," I said. "It's calmer now." But as I turned toward the window, the harbor fog thickened again, swallowing the lighthouse beam. For just a moment, the light blinked out entirely, one long dark pulse, and returned. Nora frowned. "Maintenance?" "Maybe," I said. But something deep in my gut tightened. Outside, that same buoy bell clanged once across the bay, slow and distant. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. Irene called me around midnight, voice thin with worry. She keeps saying she saw him. In the fog. At the window. "I'll come by," I said. The drive through town was empty, storefronts dark, rain tapping on the roof. As I turned onto the clinic road, my headlights caught footprints in the mud leading toward the dunes. Fresh ones. My hand found the flashlight. Inside the building, every light was off except the one glowing faintly from Lila's room. I stepped through the door, pulse quickening. The snow globe sat on the nightstand. The flakes swirled slowly, though no one had touched it. And etched along the base, where the crack had split months ago, was a fresh line of writing, carved into the metal like someone had traced it with a knife. The light never dies. I stood there listening to the faint crash of the tide, the slow creak of the walls. Somewhere out in the fog, a ship horn moaned, a deep, resonant sound rolling through the harbor. I couldn't tell if it was leaving or coming home. Fog pressed against the clinic windows like a living thing, breathing, shifting. The horn's echo still hung over the bay when I turned toward the hall. Every instinct I'd honed in 20 years on the force hummed to life again, the cold clarity that comes before danger. Irene stood in the doorway of Lila's room, coat thrown over her nightgown, eyes wide and sleepless. "Did you hear it?" she whispered. "I did," I said. "You locked the doors?" "Already did. But, Caleb," she hesitated, glancing toward her daughter's bed. "That carving on the snow globe, I swear it wasn't there an hour ago." The child's breathing was soft, steady, the globe faintly glowing under the nightlight. I studied the etched letters. The light never dies. The metal base was still cold, the grooves fresh. Whoever had done it had been close enough to touch her while she slept. "Stay here," I said. "If anything moves, hit the alarm." I eased down the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, pale against the fog outside. My hand brushed the wall, tracing toward the side exit. The air there was colder. Door cracked open a quarter inch. When I pushed it wider, fog poured in, thick as smoke. A figure stood just beyond the threshold. Tall, coat flapping, hat brim shadowing his face. "Pierce," I said quietly. He didn't move. The beam from my flashlight cut across his collar, salt-stained, torn in the same spot where the divers had found it. "Hard to kill what belongs to the tide," he said, voice low and hoarse. I stepped forward, gun leveled. "You're under arrest for—" He laughed, the sound brittle. "You think paper and ink can cage what's already sunk? Tell that to the kids you sold." That made him stop. I gave them passage. Better lives than this rot of a town ever offered. "Don't lie to yourself," I said. "You gave them chains." His smile flickered. "Maybe. But chains shine under the right light." The fog thinned just enough for me to see the pistol in his hand. "She's not your concern anymore," he said. "The girl. She's leverage, nothing more." Before he could raise the weapon, a blur moved behind him. Nora, barefoot, wielding a heavy metal flashlight, swung with both hands. The impact cracked against his wrist. The gun clattered onto the pavement. Pierce snarled, elbow catching her shoulder hard enough to drop her. I fired once, the round slamming into the doorframe inches from his head. He ducked, bolting into the fog. I sprinted after him. The world vanished into gray. I could barely see my own boots. Somewhere ahead, footsteps pounded on gravel. "Pierce!" No answer, just the rasp of breath and the slap of waves. I followed the sound toward the harbor embankment. Then I saw him. He stood at the edge of the pier again, just like that night, the beam from the lighthouse sweeping across his face. Water streamed from his hair and coat, like he'd walked straight out of the ocean. In his hand, he held the snow globe. No, a snow globe, an exact duplicate. "Do you know what she left me?" he called out. "Her key. The child had her mother's key around her neck the night you took her in. I just came to reclaim what was mine." "You mean what you stole?" I said, inching closer. The fog swirled between us, the lighthouse pulse brightening. For an instant, his eyes caught the light, pale and wild. "She won't stay safe forever," he whispered. "The sea always takes back its own." He hurled the globe into the water. Glass shattered. Flakes scattered like tiny stars before sinking. "End of story," he said, and stepped backward into the mist. I lunged forward, But when the fog cleared again, he was gone. No splash this time. No sound but the slow roll of the tide. By dawn, police combed every inch of shoreline. Nothing. No footprints beyond the pier, no body. Just shards of glass glittering between the rocks. Back at the clinic, Nora's arm was in a sling, but she waved off sympathy. "He's gone again, isn't he?" "For now," I said. "But the man bleeds like anyone else. The divers found traces of blood on the railing, fresh. If he's alive, he's hurt." Irene sat beside her daughter's bed, stroking her hair. Lila clutched the original snow globe, the one she'd kept since the night I found her. "Did he take anything?" I asked. Irene shook her head. "Only my sleep." Lila looked up at me, voice small but clear. "He said the sea talks to him." I crouched beside her. "You don't listen to people who talk to the sea, kiddo. You listen to the light." She studied the globe. "The flakes don't fall anymore," she said. "It's stuck." I turned it in my hand. The water inside had turned slightly cloudy, like the ocean after a storm. The lighthouse figure still glowed faintly when tilted toward the window. "Maybe it's resting," I said. "Even lights need time to breathe." She smiled a little. "Like Mom?" "Exactly like Mom." 2 days later, Irene was cleared to return home. She and Lila moved into a small apartment above the bakery near the marina, close enough to smell the sea, but far from the pier's ghosts. Nora helped set up a nightlight in the shape of a lighthouse. Lila wouldn't sleep without it. I kept my promise to stay close. We shared coffee most mornings, sometimes in silence. The town still talked about the case, but the Dawsons tried to live quietly. One evening, as the sun dipped into the bay, I walked to the pier alone. The light swung from the real lighthouse, clean and rhythmic again. The sea was calm, the air finally smelling of spring instead of smoke. Something glinted between the boards ahead. I knelt and pried it free. A small metal key, brass worn smooth by salt water. Number 27, faintly etched on one side. The locker key Irene had once given me. The one I'd kept taped inside the evidence file. But this one was fresh. And tied to it with red thread was a torn scrap of waterproof paper, handwriting shaky but unmistakable. "She's the next light, Caleb. Keep her safe." For a long time, I stood there listening to the tide. Somewhere far out, a buoy bell chimed once, soft, almost kind. I pocketed the key and looked toward the town, where a warm window glow marked the Dawsons' apartment. The fog began to rise again, thin and silver, catching the lighthouse beam as it swept across the harbor, steady, patient, alive. The next morning, the fog rolled in early, dulling the sunlight into a gray smear. The harbor seemed half asleep, waves slapping listlessly against pilings. I sat in my cruiser across from the marina, that brass key turning over and over between my fingers. Number 27. I'd returned the original to the evidence vault months ago. This one was new, too clean, too deliberate. Whoever left it wanted me to find it. When my phone buzzed, the caller ID read unknown. I answered anyway. "Morris." A man's breath filled the line before the voice came, slow and rasped. "You should have let the tide do its work, Lieutenant." "Pierce," I said. The silence that followed was almost intimate. "You still guarding the light? How noble, but the light doesn't belong to you anymore." "Where are you?" He chuckled softly. "Closer than you think." The line went dead. By noon, I was in Kingsley's office overlooking the bay. He'd turned the top floor of the Harborlight Center into a headquarters, donation plaques already lining the hallway. Staff in crisp polos moving between therapy rooms. From the window you could see the real lighthouse flashing against the horizon. "I heard about the call," Kingsley said. "If it was him, that means he's still local." "He left this." I slid the key onto his desk. Kingsley turned it over. "Could be a message, or bait. Probably both." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You think he wants the girl again?" "I think he wants to remind us he's still in control." Kingsley nodded slowly, thoughtful. We have private security running patrols by the docks. I'll double them. Don't, I said. He wants movement. Panic makes us sloppy. Better if he thinks we're waiting. Kingsley studied me. You're not a cop anymore, Caleb. You can't keep chasing him forever. I'm not chasing him. I looked toward the lighthouse. I'm finishing what he started. That evening, I stopped by the Dawsons' apartment. The smell of bread and cinnamon drifted up from the bakery below. Lila was at the table, drawing with colored pencils, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Hey, detective? She said without looking up. Retired detective, I corrected. What are you working on? She turned the paper around. A picture of the harbor, boats, birds, and in the center, the lighthouse, drawn taller than everything else. In the window she'd drawn a small stick figure holding a snow globe. That's you, she said. I smiled. You made me taller than the lighthouse. She shrugged. You find things. Irene emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands. You shouldn't spoil her like that. She already thinks the sun rises when you say so. Sun doesn't rise here, I said. It claws its way through fog. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hadn't existed in her voice before the case broke. Over dinner, she told me she'd been offered a job at the new fish co-op. A smaller operation. Honest one this time. That's good, I said. Keep close to shore for a while. She studied me. You think he's coming back? I know he is. Lila looked between us. Is he the man from the sea? Not anymore, I said gently. He can't come in without a light to follow, remember? She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Around midnight, a nor'easter blew in. Rain hammered the roofs, wind screamed down the alleys. I couldn't sleep, so I drove to the lighthouse. The beam swung lazily through sheets of rain, each flash carving silver paths across the waves. Halfway up the access road, I spotted another vehicle already there, an old sedan with one taillight out. I killed my engine, stepped out, and approached on foot. Empty. Door hanging open. On the front seat, a wet envelope lay weighed down by a smooth stone. Inside was a single Polaroid, the interior of a locker, number 27 again. On the back, scrawled in blue ink, "She's next to follow the light." My stomach dropped. I radioed dispatch immediately. Unit 12 requesting patrol at Harborlight Center. Possible threat to protected minor. Initiate lockdown. Static, then. Copy, Lieutenant. Officers en route. I was already moving before they finished. When I reached the center, the power was out. The whole building glowed dim under emergency backup lights. A maintenance van idled by the side entrance, engine running, driver's seat empty. Inside, the corridors smelled of ozone and wet plaster. Bar Harbor PD, I called, flashlight sweeping. Anyone here? A faint sob answered from upstairs. I ran. On the second floor, a door stood open. The therapy playroom. Lila sat inside, knees drawn up, clutching her snow globe. Behind her, the window was shattered, rain blowing in. I heard him, she whispered. The man from the sea. He said to come see the light. I dropped to my knees beside her. You did good not to follow him. Where's your mom? Downstairs, she said. He said she'd meet me by the water. I felt the world tilt for a heartbeat. Stay here, I said. Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but Nora. Promise you'll come back? I touched her shoulder. Always. Outside, the storm was a wall of water. I followed the footprints through the mud toward the docks. The lighthouse beam flickered through rain, strobing the scene in violent bursts. Water, wood, shadow. Near the pier's end, two silhouettes struggled against the wind. Irene and him. She was fighting, trying to wrench free, but he had her by the arm. The sea boiled below them. "Pierce!" I shouted. He turned, rain slicking his hair to his skull. Even from yards away, I could see the madness burning in his eyes. She doesn't belong to this world anymore, Lieutenant. None of us do. He shoved Irene forward. She stumbled, caught the railing. I fired once, high, warning. The sound was swallowed by thunder. Pierce laughed. You can't shoot what the sea already owns. He yanked her toward the edge, but Irene's knee came up fast, catching him off guard. She tore free, slipped, and fell hard against the planks. I closed the distance in seconds, slamming into him before he could recover. We hit the boards, rolling, fists and rain and breathless curses. His hand found a knife. Mine found his wrist. The blade scraped my arm before I wrenched it away and sent it spinning into the dark. He clawed at my jacket, face inches from mine. You think you can keep her from the light? The sea takes what it's promised. Lightning flared. I saw him fully then, pale, trembling, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked with salt. Not a ghost. Just a man too far gone to know he'd lost. I drove my elbow into his jaw. He went limp, sliding halfway toward the water. I grabbed Irene, hauling her up. Go! Together we staggered down the pier, the storm pushing against us. Behind us, another crash, timbers giving way. I turned back just long enough to see the railing collapse, dragging Pierce down with it. His scream was lost to the wind. The waves closed over him, for good this time. We reached the shore soaked and shaking. Police lights flashed blue through the rain as patrol cars arrived. Lila burst from the center's doors, running barefoot through puddles. Mom! Irene dropped to her knees, arms open. Lila crashed into her, sobbing. It's okay, Irene whispered. He's gone. It's all right. I stood a few feet away, the adrenaline finally breaking into exhaustion. Nora appeared with a blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders without a word. Over the bay, the storm began to thin. The lighthouse beam swept steady once more, cutting through the last of the fog. Lila turned toward it, still in her mother's arms. See? She whispered. The light came back. I looked out across the water. The sea was calm again, as if it hadn't just swallowed a monster. But deep down, I knew how tides worked. They always brought things back eventually. By dawn, the storm had rolled east, leaving the town washed clean but raw. Seaweed draped the railings, gulls picked through the wreckage of the pier. The lighthouse beam was off now, its keeper repairing the lantern glass shattered by wind, but the horizon still glowed pale gold, the color of reprieve. I'd barely slept. My left arm was bandaged where the knife had grazed me. Salt stung every movement. The patrol captain met me by the cruiser, raincoat flapping. No sign of him, she said. Divers searched from the shoal to the point. Nothing but wreckage. Let it stay that way, I said. She nodded. The feds want a statement by noon. I'll be there. When she left, I stayed. The tide hissed against the pilings. I could almost hear his voice still, that cracked whisper. The sea takes what it's promised. I shoved it down. Some ghosts you fight, some you just outwait. At the Harborlight Center, the lobby smelled of disinfectant and cinnamon muffins from the staff kitchen. The chaos of the night had already been scrubbed away. Kids played in the art room again, crayons and laughter bleeding into the halls. I found Nora at the nurse's desk, coffee in hand, sling still on her shoulder. He's gone, she said simply. Bodies don't always stay buried, I replied. She met my eyes. You can't live like that, Caleb. If you keep waiting for him to come back, he wins every time the wind changes. I exhaled. Maybe. Then she smiled. She's asking for you. Lila sat cross-legged on her bed, snow globe between her knees. Irene was beside her, hair damp, eyes hollow but alive. The mother looked up as I entered, something quiet passing between us, gratitude that didn't need words. Guess you can't stay away from trouble, Irene said. I like happy endings, I answered. Lila grinned. We made muffins. Want one? I took it. Too sweet, half-baked, perfect. The girl held up her globe. It doesn't shake anymore, she said softly. It just glows. Sure enough, the flakes inside barely moved, but the lighthouse shimmered faintly even without light. I set my hand over hers. Maybe it's finished storming. She nodded, satisfied, and rested her head against her mother's arm. At noon, the federal office conference room was full. Agents, prosecutors, cameras. Kingsley was there too, suit immaculate, the philanthropist face back in place. He caught my eye across the table. We shared a look that said we both knew what image this meeting was for. They called it a closure briefing. They said justice achieved, heroes of Bar Harbor, community healing, words polished for headlines. When it was my turn to speak, I said only, sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom. Sometimes it's a kid who finally sleeps through the night. The room went still, then polite applause. The cameras flashed. Afterward, Kingsley found me by the stairwell. "You should take credit while the light's on you," he said. "I didn't do it for light." He smiled faintly. "Then you're rarer than you think." Spring settled in slow. The harbor thawed. New boats painted their hulls. The Harborlight Center became a refuge, not just for the children from Pierce's network, but for half the coast's lost cases. Irene volunteered part-time, running craft sessions. Lila drew maps of imaginary islands, each with its own lighthouse. Sometimes, when the fog rolled in, she'd press her globe against the window and whisper, "We made it through." I'd visit in the evenings. She'd drag me to the pier to count the flashes. 1, 2, 3, her small hand wrapped around mine. "Mom says lights mean people are watching over us," she said once. "She's right," I said. "But sometimes it's the people on shore keeping the lamps lit." She thought about that, brow furrowing. "Then you're the keeper." I swallowed hard. "Maybe for a while." Late one night, after they'd both gone home, I lingered by the empty dock. The sky was clear for once, stars bright enough to outshine the beacon. The sea lay calm, black glass stretching forever. I took the brass key from my pocket, the one with the red thread. Under the moonlight, the engraving 27 shimmered faintly. I turned it over, half expecting another message, another trap. Nothing. Just cold metal. I crouched by the water's edge and dropped it in. It sank silently. No ripple left behind. Behind me, footsteps approached. Nora's voice came soft. "Letting go?" "Trying to." She stood beside me looking out at the waves. "You know, lightkeepers used to stay awake through every storm, afraid the flame would die. When electricity came, they still kept watch, out of habit. Old habits die harder than storms." She smiled. "Then maybe it's time you sleep." A month later, the lighthouse opened for tours again. Irene brought Lila up the spiral stairs while I waited below, pretending I didn't care if the climb was too steep. From above came their laughter, echoing off the stone. When they descended, Lila was holding something new, a miniature replica of the lighthouse from the gift shop, freshly polished. "Look," she said proudly, "Mom said I can start a collection. This one's for good weather." Irene handed me a second globe. "She insisted you get one too. So he never forgets where to look," she said. Inside it, the flakes drifted slowly around a shining light that never dimmed. I turned it in my hand, watching the tiny spark pulse steady and sure. "Guess I'll keep watch a little longer," I said. That night, standing on the pier, I placed the new globe on the railing and waited until the real beacon aligned perfectly behind it. For one heartbeat, the reflection merged, the tiny light inside and the vast one beyond, until I couldn't tell them apart. Wind off the bay carried the sound of a child's laughter from somewhere up the hill. The sea was calm, the air smelled of salt and bread, and something like forgiveness. And for the first time in a long while, I believed the message carved into that first globe might be true. The light never dies. Summer arrived quietly that year, soft as forgiveness. The gulls came back. The docks filled with tourists, and the scars of the storm faded under new paint and laughter. But I'd learned not to trust silence. In a harbor town, silence is only the breath before a tide turns. The Harborlight Center thrived. Kids rode their bikes along the waterfront. Volunteers planted flowers by the fence. Lila grew taller, her hair lighter from salt air, her laugh unguarded. Irene looked 10 years younger, though her eyes still carried that deep attentiveness of someone who'd lived through fire. I stopped by most mornings, always pretending I was just checking locks, never admitting I needed the peace. Nora ran the place now, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other. "You should take a break," she told me one Friday, squinting into the sun. "It's been months, Caleb. No sightings, no calls. Maybe the sea finally kept what it took." "Maybe," I said. "But tides have long memories." She rolled her eyes. "Then let it remember without you." I smiled. "You know I don't do easy goodbyes." That afternoon, I drove to the far end of Frenchman Bay. The cliffs there were higher, wind sharper, the view wide enough to make a man feel small. I parked near the overlook, where the lighthouse beam cut across open water. From my pocket, I pulled the replica snow globe Lila had given me. The light inside blinked softly with a small internal bulb. Battery-powered, fragile, perfect. It wasn't much different from the real one. Both relied on someone to keep the power running. A car door slammed behind me. I turned. Kingsley stood there, coat flapping in the breeze. "Didn't expect to find you playing tourist," he said. "Old habits," I replied. "You here for the fundraiser?" He nodded towards town. "We're expanding. Shelter for teens this time. Harborlight's grown faster than I thought." "That's good." He studied me a moment. "You still think about him, don't you?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly when the fog rolls in. But it's quieter now, like the sea got tired of carrying his ghost." Kingsley looked out toward the horizon. "You ever wonder if that light's for us, or for the ones still lost out there?" "Maybe both." He nodded, hands in pockets. "Well, keep it burning, Lieutenant." That evening, the Dawsons invited me to dinner at their new cottage. Lila had painted the front door blue, like the sky over the lighthouse, she said. Irene grilled fish on the back porch. Nora joined us, laughing at some story about hospital chaos. It was the kind of night you don't realize you'll remember until years later, the ordinary peace that feels borrowed. After dinner, Lila tugged my sleeve. "Come see," she said. She led me to her room. On the windowsill stood a row of snow globes, each one different. Lighthouses, sailboats, stars. At the end of the row sat the cracked original, repaired with epoxy, its glow still faint but steady. "I fixed it," she said proudly. "Now it never stops shining." I crouched beside her. "You've built your own fleet." She nodded. "Mom says lights help other people find their way, so I'm going to send them to the kids who got lost, the ones from the lists." Her matter-of-fact tone broke something open in my chest. "That's a good mission, Lila." She turned serious. "You'll help, right?" "I'll help," I said. She smiled, satisfied, and turned the globe so its light faced the window. Outside, the real lighthouse answered with a slow, perfect pulse. Later, when the dishes were done and Lila was asleep, Irene walked me to the porch. The air smelled of rain on wood and lemon balm. "She's different since you came around," she said. "Not afraid of dark corners anymore." "She did the hard part," I said. "She kept believing the light meant something." Irene's gaze lingered on me. "And you? What do you believe now?" I hesitated. "That some people are meant to hold the lamp. Not forever, just long enough for someone else to see it." She smiled, quiet and genuine. "That's enough." On my way home, I took the coastal road. The moon hung low, turning the water silver. As I passed the pier, a small figure caught my eye. Someone standing at the far edge, silhouetted against the waves. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened, thinking, no, hoping, it wasn't him. But when I slowed, I saw the truth. It was Nora. She turned when my headlights hit her. "Couldn't sleep," she said when I joined her. "Thought I'd check the locks like a certain ex-detective I know." "Bad habit to catch," I said. She smiled faintly, wind tugging her hair. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "Every day." "Then why don't you?" Because the light's still burning. She looked at the horizon, where the beam cut the darkness clean in two. You really think it never dies? Not if someone keeps watch. We stood there a while, saying nothing. The tide came in slow and patient, brushing the pilings like an old friend. When I finally turned to leave, I saw her reflection doubled in the water, two figures standing beside one unwavering light. A week later, Lila mailed her first snow globe. It went to a shelter in Portland where a rescued boy named Daniel had drawn lighthouses on every page of his therapy journal. Then another went to Boston, then Bangor. Word spread. The Harborlight kids began sending them too, one globe for every name still missing from the manifests. They called it the Light Project. At night, the center's windows glowed with rows of tiny beacons, each one flickering in the dark like a constellation built from second chances. Sometimes, standing on the pier, I'd imagine those lights stretching across the whole coast, guiding anyone still lost toward home. One evening, as dusk settled over the bay, I found a new snow globe on my porch. No note, no delivery mark. Inside it, a miniature pier, a small figure standing alone beside a shining light. When I shook it, the flakes swirled slow, catching the last sunlight. And there it was again, faintly etched into the base, the words that had haunted and steadied us all: the light never dies. The beam from the real lighthouse swept across the water then, striking the globe, the house, and for one fleeting instant, everything glowed as one. Harbor, home, and heart illuminated together. And I finally understood. The sea remembers, but so does the light. The light never dies.